afternoon, Your Highnesses, Excellencies and Dignitaries, members of the ABLF network and our wonderful guests here today. My name is Resham Katecha and I'm a Policy and Strategy Specialist based in London. I am absolutely delighted to be here today at the ABLF City. My current guest is a really fascinating man who has had experiences in the private and third sector and currently works at UNICEF. He works with UNICEF's supply division leading on private sector partnerships, strategy and country support to advance equitable access to products and services in lower and middle income countries and to improve the well-being of children. David has been at UNICEF since 2002, and before joining UNICEF, he worked in fundraising for several UK NGOs and also worked in commercial marketing in the private sector. He's doing fascinating work on vaccines, and David, we're so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Resham. Thank you for the warm welcome and greetings to everybody. I only wish we could be together in Dubai as I look out to see the snow here in England today. I wish it could be 30 degrees in Dubai, but there we go. But nice to talk to you.
Both, David. You and me both. So let's get straight into it, because your job is fascinating and so relevant to people to hear about what you're doing in terms of vaccines. So let's just start with a little bit about what do you actually do, and then can you tell us what the most effective measures are that have been made to ensure global collaboration to speed up the development, production and equal access to COVID-19 treatment and vaccines?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned in the introduction, I work in UNICEF's supply division. So it's the part of UNICEF which deals with buying and shipping essential life-saving supplies for children and families around the world. We are based in Copenhagen because of the free port there, where we have the largest humanitarian warehouse in the world. I'm currently in England because of COVID travel restrictions, but that's normally where I'm based. So the part of my role which is most relevant for today's session is on partnerships. So we of course have relationships with actually around 10,000 suppliers around the world for our thousands of supplies for children. But equally, we also work in partnership with many businesses and other organizations, non-commercial relationships, as you were. So I oversee that side of supply division's business. So I think, Resham, your question was around the global response to COVID-19. I think when we're talking about global collaboration and public and private sectors coming together, I think the most exciting and arguably most important initiative has been what's called the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator. It's a rather long term for a platform set up just under a year ago, last April, where a number of key players across the public and private sector came together to agree on R&D and bringing to market and distribution of products in 3 areas: the testing of COVID-19, the treatment, and the vaccines ultimately. And the entities involved range from, of course, UNICEF, other UN agencies, the World Health Organization, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, governments, private sector bodies, a whole range of actors. And so across these 3 pillars I mentioned, testing, treatment, and vaccines, the accelerator, this platform, set out a roadmap and brought in financing from different sources, public and private, to invest in R&D and ultimately to bring to market products in these different areas and to distribute those products to countries and obviously ensure delivery to patients, as it were. The whole premise of this platform is that everyone should have equal access to these treatments, tests and vaccines regardless of where they live. And if we didn't have that approach, then you would find gross inequities, and you'd find obviously that those living in higher income countries would have faster access to more quality products. And this is what the platform aims to avoid, making sure it's sort of equal worldwide. So I think that's, and we've made tremendous progress. I mean, a number of treatments, as the audience knows, on the market and out in these countries, many sort of different types of diagnostics tests, which we distribute to countries. And right now, of course, most in the spotlight is the part on vaccines, but I know we'll come to that.
And why was UNICEF selected to lead the procurement and delivery of vaccines for COVAX?
Yeah, so COVAX is another name for the vaccine part of the platform I referred to. And UNICEF, well, actually, it may surprise people to know that UNICEF is actually the largest single buyer of vaccines in the world. Each year, we buy around 2 billion doses on behalf of nearly 100 countries who want to benefit from UNICEF's expertise, our collective buying power. So in fact, over the last 20 years, together with partners such as Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, we've helped to reach more than 760 million children with life-saving vaccines. And actually, it's quite humbling to think that that's prevented more than 13 million childhood deaths over that period of 20 years. So UNICEF has a strong track record in vaccines, and not just for children. We also deal with adult vaccines, whether it's yellow fever or tetanus. So when those involved right from the beginning with the platform thought about who best is equipped to lead on the vaccine part in terms of the purchase and the distribution of the vaccines, they turned to UNICEF. So yeah, that's why we stand where we are today.
Wow, that's amazing. And what is the current status of the procurement and deliveries by UNICEF and some of those other national and international buyers participating in the COVAX facility?
Yeah, current status. Well, things are moving very fast, literally day to day. The plan is still that the COVAX facility will distribute 2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines this year. And that number was calculated based on reaching 20% on average of the populations in the member countries, around 190 countries, 20% being healthcare workers and other priority groups, such as teachers, those most at risk, etc. And the World Health Organization has designed the allocation principles of how those doses will be allocated to countries, guided by that 20%, so that all the countries as part of the platform will get equal access to those vaccines to be able to immunize that 20% of their population this year. Now, as for the pace of that, it's a challenge. Manufacturers have indicated that most of their doses will likely not be available till the second half of the year. And we all know that's because of deals that were made very early on by a number of countries. And COVAX is facing a similar scenario with governments who have purchased sufficient to vaccinate more than actually their populations, such as where we are in the UK today. I think we know that the UK, I think, has purchased sufficient vaccines to cover the population around 3 times over, I think, because obviously they had to bet on different vaccine candidates. But many governments have said they will be willing to release their doses to COVAX, which is wonderful. And we're counting on that, their excess doses. But again, that will probably not come till later. So our challenge right now is getting enough vaccines soon enough. So just in the last few days, the COVAX facilities announced the initial distribution plan, starting with the Pfizer vaccine, a small allocation to going to 18 countries. That's just 1.2 million doses, an initial allocation. And then the AstraZeneca vaccine, which will be manufactured for the facility by the Serum Institute of India, that we confirmed nearly 350 million doses of that vaccine to these countries, subject to the regulatory approval by the WHO. And so this supply should come through in the first half of this year. And obviously we're in daily contact with the countries to confirm all that. So it's going well, but not without difficulties in terms of getting sufficient supply.
Of course, a challenge that many can empathise with. And in particular, you mentioned, and I think most people know, that COVAX is targeting less well-off countries, but there's been some controversy in the press in recent days about some of the more wealthy countries exercising their rights to access vaccines via COVAX. How do you manage that, and what should we be doing to ensure that supplies of vaccines are really going to the countries that can't afford them themselves?
Yes, I mean, the COVAX facility from the beginning has been also open to countries who pay for themselves. So if you like, the priority countries for COVAX are 82 countries whose vaccines will be financed from outside the country through the facility, financed by higher income governments, by development banks, etc. So those group of countries are the priority. And those clearly are the lower and lower middle income countries. But the facility is also available to other countries outside that group who will be paying for their own vaccines, but who want to benefit from the buying power and also believe in the principle of COVAX. So the more that are in COVAX, the more volumes we have, everyone benefits. So a number of countries have joined. These are called self-financing countries. But we have no concern that will at all impact on the supply to the priority lower and middle income countries. It's simply that we're able to get better bargaining power, if you like, by having larger volumes to negotiate. So we don't see that as an issue at this stage.
So misleading newspaper headlines to blame then. Thank you for clarifying that. So you mentioned a little bit earlier in your answers about partners filling gaps. What are the specific gaps that you see partners being able to fill? And when you talk about partners, are you talking about institutions, governments, other NGOs, or a mix of everything?
Not surprisingly, a mix of everything. I mean, I know today our focus is really on the business sector or private sector, and clearly the private sector is absolutely key to success here. As I mentioned, the vaccine manufacturers themselves absolutely critical with their R&D and manufacturing. We are working with the airlines to ensure that the vaccines are given due priority and transported in the right conditions, etc. It's not that this is new. Like I said, we transport vaccines with airlines year in, year out, but there are some special temperature control requirements for some of these vaccines. Mm-hmm. And the scale and short lead times do make it quite a complex operation. So it's going to be the largest and fastest global vaccine operation ever. So it's quite complex and it's high volume, and there are lots of uncertainties around the supply of the doses to be navigated, if you like. So we're working with the airlines on that, and they are absolutely have been keen from the beginning to work with us, and also with IATA, the airline industry body, who's been helping us on this. We're also working with logistics companies who cover everything from management of ports to shipping and in-country logistics, because it's not just the vaccines. If you think about it, it's also the supplies that come with it. You can't vaccinate without syringes. So as well as the 2 billion doses of vaccine, we will have to be distributing 2 billion syringes this year. That bulky equipment usually goes by sea, and therefore we're working with the shipping companies, for example, to make sure that the current congestion in the global shipping industry does not impede the transport of syringes and other supplies, such as the safety devices, safety boxes in which needles are disposed of, and very importantly, PPE. You can imagine that it's so important to have PPE for those who are vaccinating. So we're working with a number of logistics companies. We signed they signed with us a fantastic charter back in December, wherein they set out their commitment to supporting COVAX and UNICEF. And in fact, just in the last 2 weeks, we announced a long-term partnership with Dubai Ports World, who will be supporting UNICEF's supply operation for COVAX and beyond, including with huge warehousing and logistics support in Dubai. But we're in discussion with several logistics firms. And I must say, again, we've been really overwhelmed with the genuine commitment and support coming from industry at the industry level. It's at times like this that competitive pressures can be set aside whilst everyone is in this for the common good. I mean, obviously, there are many other partners which governments themselves are the key partners, particularly in terms of supporting the recipient countries, as in those receiving the vaccine, to help them prepare for that, because that's one area which is sometimes neglected in the news, that the ability of countries to be able to transport these vaccines, particularly those that have special refrigeration requirements like the Pfizer vaccine. In some of these countries, it's very challenging to have the cold chain needed to transport these vaccines. And also the way they'll be distributed will be different to usual distribution. So there's quite a lot of complexity at the country level. So working with those governments and supporting them as they make their plans is equally important.
And where does COVAX's responsibility end? Are you responsible until that syringe is in somebody's arm? How do you support governments, especially in countries where the supply chain is weak, or they don't necessarily have the infrastructure or the logistical knowledge to be able to ensure that the distribution of these complex vaccines is done in a way that means the vaccine goes not only to those who need it, but in the quickest time frame possible and without any waste or damage?
Yeah, you've put it absolutely well, Risham. That's so true, and that in-country supply chain, if you like, is extremely important. And so, yes, our responsibility includes supporting governments with that. So the way it works is every government in the country, the priority countries I referred to, has some kind of national logistics working group or task force on this, bringing together the relevant ministries and UN, including UNICEF and other bodies. And guided by UNICEF, they have been actually for some time developing their sort of vaccine preparedness plans and identifying particularly where there are bottlenecks. So if, for example, countries identify that for the Moderna vaccine, they will need to increase their refrigeration equipment in both the port of entry at the main airport, but also in provincial cities, then we might need to support with additional equipment, for example. Or another area which is less talked about is actually attitudes towards vaccination. This will involve vaccinating people some who've never even been vaccinated or haven't been vaccinated since they were children. And so reinforcing confidence and trust in the vaccines is also important. So that what we call country readiness has been and continues to be a big focus of UNICEF working with those countries.
And of course, here in the UK, you'll talk about vaccine readiness or making people feel comfortable with vaccines. We're seeing a significantly lower uptake in vaccinations amongst BME groups compared to the Caucasian population. How do UNICEF manage some of those cultural issues? And are those cultural issues common in other countries between ethnicities, or is that just a UK specific problem?
It's an obvious answer, I'm afraid, but it varies by country. So I was, for example, talking to the head of UNICEF in Rwanda a few weeks ago, and in Rwanda, actually, as an example, the attitude towards the vaccines is very positive, and actually uptake they expect to be high with no major issues. But clearly there'll be a number of countries in which, like in the UK, there might be different attitudes amongst different ethnic groups, as it were, which might be to do with, heritage issues around how vaccines were rolled out in the past, or even some concerns around the product itself, etc. So it's clear that in many countries there is going to be some hesitancy about taking the vaccine. So we have a whole other stream of work particularly with community organizations and local leaders and social media and influencers to ensure or help ensure that those targeted for the vaccine actually do, agree to take it. So so yes, it's not only an issue here in the UK, it will be an issue in many countries, and we're on it, as it were.
I'm sure you are. And of course, governments around the world have had to spend a huge amount of time, energy and resource on the focus to procure and administer COVID-19 vaccines for their citizens. How have you seen this impacting other essential services?
Yeah, this has been actually a real concern for us in UNICEF, because, whilst all the attention is on the effects of COVID itself, the secondary effects have been really massive. I mean, to give a couple of examples for the audience, before COVID, global vaccination coverage rates were actually stagnating. So huge progress in recent decades, but still too many children, 20 million children, in fact, unvaccinated every year. And the rate of that vaccination, the rate of improvement in vaccination coverage had been stagnating. That's even before COVID. The latest reporting we have shows that around 1/3 of countries worldwide have had a drop of at least 10% in coverage of routine vaccinations due to COVID disruptions. And that means, for example, there are in the order of 80 million children under the age of 1 at risk of diseases such as diphtheria, measles, and polio because of these disruptions. In fact, UNICEF has done some estimates of the impact on health systems in total. And we're talking here obviously about health systems that have been disrupted due to sickness of health workers, due to lockdowns and other measures that have been had to be taken, which then have an impact on health services. We estimate that that impact on health services could lead to additional 6,000 children dying every day from preventable causes worldwide. Gosh. And I could go on. The impact on learning is quite dramatic, and everyone can relate to this, I'm sure. But again, our estimates are that 10% more school-aged children could enter what we call learning poverty due to COVID, and that is their ability to read simple text or being out of school by the age they're 10 years old, and that's due to closure of schools and learning facilities, etc. So whilst attending to the vaccine challenge and the tests and the treatments for COVID, which is super important to turn the corner on this pandemic so that these kind of services can get back on track, we're also in the background working to address these other issues and continue to strengthen the systems that governments have to provide these services.
And you've spoken a little about the impact on education and very sadly, child mortality rates. What do you see the impact being on the world's progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, that's a good question. For the audience's benefit, I mean, excuse me, many of you will know, but the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, agreed in 2015 by the world's governments to replace the previous MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. So the SDGs agreed, where are we now, 5-6 years ago, set measurable, ambitious targets to reach by 2030 across a whole range of areas: ending child poverty, improving education, addressing climate change, a whole range of areas, 17 goals with a number of indicators. What was different about the SDGs was that it applied not just to what we would previously call developing countries, but to every country, recognizing that this is a global challenge to advance sustainability and development. So anyway, all these goals. So UNICEF, obviously, we look very closely and monitor progress towards the child-related SDGs. One of the indicators is what we call the under 5 mortality rate.
Mhm.
So the rate at which children die before reaching their 5th birthday. And huge progress has been achieved over the decades. I mean, as an example, in 1990, there were 93 deaths for every 1,000 live births. And in 2019, that had reduced to 38.
Wow.
So massive progress. And in fact, over 120 countries in the world had achieved an under 5 mortality rate below the SDG target of 25 or fewer deaths per 1,000 live births. So they'd already achieved the 2030 target, if you like. That's the good news. The bad news is that there are 53 countries where even if they maintain current progress before COVID, they would not hit their SDG target. And so their progress, even before COVID, would have had to have been accelerated. And now with COVID, that means that acceleration will have to be even greater. I'll mention one other, water and sanitation. So access to clean water. That is the most off-track SDG goal. And so countries are going to have to dramatically accelerate progress towards that target with greater investment of resource and political attention.
So what is your call to action for our audience today? How can we support UNICEF with this historic drive to vaccinate the world? And how can we support governments and NGOs to get back on track to achieving these really vitally important SDGs?
Okay, yeah, good question, Resham. So clearly private sector through their own businesses have a role to play as suppliers, in some cases as partners. I would say, however, that the most obvious and universal need we have from potential partners is funding, to be quite frank. Funding for the facility itself for purchasing the vaccines, and that funding is in the billions and needs to come, it will come particularly from those governments able to afford it and the development banks, etc. And also then for UNICEF itself, we have a funding gap of over $600 million to finance all the work that UNICEF needs to do around the tests, the treatments, and the vaccines. And in the background document for the session, if anyone's interested, you'll be able to see a summary of those funding needs. So that funding is very important. However, partners can promote confidence in the vaccine to ensure take-up and promote the concept that access to the testing, the treatments and the vaccines to tackle COVID-19 should be equal worldwide and should not be a function of where you live. So I think that those are some of the things that can be done. And practically speaking, if you, through your business, through your personal network, through your personal assets, would like to support UNICEF and this effort, either go online and search or reach out to the UNICEF office in your country, wherever you are. I know we have a global audience today. UNICEF is pretty much in every country, so reach out to your UNICEF office and find out how it is you can help, particularly, as I said, in terms of funding. That's a massive issue for us, but also, these other areas I've mentioned.
And I would follow on to that, say, hearing about such a big funding gap, $600 million, I just want you to reassure those in the audience or those in the private sector that cannot promise multi-million dollars worth of support, but would still like to help. Will their small offering make a dent in the scale? Can people play their part even if they don't have significant amounts to donate or contribute?
Resham, I know it's a truism. I've been saying it for years. Every little really does count. If you look at it in terms of billions and millions, of course, it can seem like a drop in the ocean. But if we all thought like that, if I thought that about my personal contributions to good causes, if we all think like that, then the world is doomed. Every little does count, and we even have breakdowns for how, just a few dollars can help in terms of buying syringes, buying safety boxes, PPE equipment. So it really does. Every bit counts.
Well, David, thank you so much for your fascinating insights on COVAX, on UNICEF, and the work to achieve the SDGs. To our audience, if you missed the beginning of this or any other session from today, please do go back onto the platform. You can watch this from the beginning and check out all of the sessions from today and previous ABLF sessions, and make sure that you tweet or share on social media with the hashtag ABLFcity. Thank you once again, David. I loved this session with you, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. Remember that we are back every month featuring global leaders in powerful conversations.